Salamat pagi. Semwanya. I mean, that's the only bahasa that I know. I'm sorry. Right? And how you are doing, I think, is written as Apa kabarmu. Apa kabarmu? Yeah. So the energy says that you're doing good, right? So good energy, just had your tea, coffee. Good to see you all energized. I'll keep on walking, close to your table so that I don't let you sleep, okay? So that's the best way to do it, right? I hope you're okay. And I need your support in this session because I will primarily be talking in English, and I understand the sessions have been in Bahasa. I got a lot of courage from David because he was talking in English, so I took the dare to talk in English. That's the only language that I know, which is global. So bear with me, right? I manage the operations for this company called Hono. We essentially are a global SaaS-based HR tech automation platform, which means we automate almost every operative life cycle process that you can think of in HR, right? But we also do a lot of work in employee engagement, sentiment analysis, and also a lot of work on intelligence. Of course, intelligence, one part of intelligence is analytics. And the topic today is analytics, so I'm going to talk about that in detail. So that's what Hono does. We have close to 1 million user base on our platform already, operating out of India, Middle East, and Southeast Asia, of course, Jakarta, and spreading our wings as we move forward. So that's a little bit about Hono. I think I'll also need the stick to operate the presentation. Yes, thank you. So people analytics, quite a elaborate topic, that we have to cover in the next 45 minutes to 1 hour. But what I'll be talking about primarily in this session is what is people analytics, because we need to establish this together, right? It is not I who am going to establish this. We will work it out together to see what people analytics is. In fact, people analytics or talent analytics, are interchangeably used in our terminology in HR. So we're going to establish what is people analytics. We're also going to talk about what makes it so important for business and HR alike, right? Because analytics, the genesis is from business, but of course, HR has picked up over the last decade of how we look at numbers, people numbers, and what do you make out of those numbers is something that's important, right? Or the data that is coming. So that's point number 2. We're also going to talk about what's the start point to people analytics. This is very important because most of the times organizations struggle with searching for the start point. How do you look at people analytics? What do you cover? What kind of data can you assimilate? What can you make out of that data, right? So that's what we're going to establish. We're also going to talk about how the maturity model works for an organization. Where do you start from? What's the zenith? And where do you move forward from that point, right? So we'll cover that as well. We are also going to talk about key people analytics that you could keep in mind. We're not going to look at what is happening, in some of the organizations in terms of the key people matrices they are using. What we will establish very deeply is where we are today and what's the journey forward in people analytics, right? And finally, we're going to look at how do you sustain this journey, how do you build this journey, and we will have a Q&A. I think Slido is something that we're going to use as a common platform. And I also have a surprise. The best question that gets asked on Slido has a special hamper from Hono. So we're going to gift a special hamper. So please ask questions. I'll be very happy to answer those questions, right? So let's start with the topic. In fact, if you were to look at people analytics as a word 10 years ago, what comes to your mind? Yeah, it's very funny. You will get blank stares 10 years ago if someone was talking about people analytics. Believe you me, when I was carrying a card for HR technology 10 years ago, people used to laugh at me. You are neither in HR nor in technology. What are you doing? Right? So that's the kind of stare that I got 10 or 11 years ago. But I think now the model has actually matured. So these blank stares have now moved to a concept which is called wow, which means at the end of the day, when HR or business is able to interpret the data that we've collected through various sources, there is a wow effect that one can create through people analytics, right? So I'm sure you would be doing people analytics or some bit of analytics or data crunching within your organization using any of the platforms, right? Can I have a raise of hand who are, are we doing analytics right now or not? Basic, advanced, medium, are we looking at analytics today in your organizations? Raise of hands. Let's do a percentage of raise of hands. Okay, just one. That is a bleak. 2, 3, 4. Raise of hand. I will not bite you off, okay? So you can raise your hands, okay? So understand, right? So if you were to look at global statistics and one of the surveys that McKinsey did, 70% of the respondents believed that people analytics is the most important component for driving business, right? But when there was another question asked, to the same respondents, what essentially or what stage of people analytics you are doing, whether it is advanced or say, at a medium level or at a low level, 8% of the respondents were doing something very significant in people analytics. So you see the gap, which is 70% believe that it's very important, but only 8% of the respondents actually said we're doing something very significant, which is a huge gap. Now, how do we look at this gap? What essentially is leading to this gap? So my objective today is not to over-convolute the things, meaning not making things complex, but let's simplify this concept, right? Because people analytics, when it comes to defining people analytics, at times we shy away because we believe it's quite technical. We should not be talking about it. People analytics means a lot of complexities that are built in. So how do we really get into preparing an equation for our organization or business to see people analytics in a very positive way, right? So essentially, what is people analytics, right? It is one of the most exciting and fastest growing domains of business and HR. Why it is exciting? Because what we are doing today, right, is a result of what we did 10 years ago. We matured from a model of systems and technology and processes where we only used to collect data. Last 10, 20 years, or 25 years for that matter, you would have heard of SAP, Oracle, these large solutions, ERP solutions, only focused on being system of records, right? So when we are creating records, we've been doing that for the last 10 years, 20 years, and there is a significant data that today world is sitting over. How many of you know this term called data scientists? Data scientists? We've heard of it? A nod will also do. I think you guys are scared of me. Right? No need to be scared of me. But you've heard of data scientists, right? Right? Where does this data science come from? If you don't have data, there is no science, right? So what we've been building over a period of time is a lot of data, and now we are actually applying some science on that data. Now, if you were to look at it from a business perspective, business can actually understand the way they are operating. Where is the productivity loss? What is it that we can do to make ourselves better through analytics? Simple, right? That's what you do with analytics. And from an HR or people perspective, what is people analytics? It is actually collecting, and so as to say, cleaning this data and putting it to good use is what analytics is. As simple as that. There is no complexity. But the points that are covered is first collecting data, sanitizing it, cleaning it, and then putting it to use. Now those are the three important components that one needs to keep in mind while you're approaching people analytics, right? So it's a very simple definition. No complexity. I'm not talking about AI, ML. I'm not talking about data science. I'm not talking about Python. I think Steven spoke about this language called Python where you do some bit of programming, right, for intelligence. I'm not talking about that. So it's simple. How do you collect data? How do you process that data? What is the output that you seek from data is what people analytics is all about, or analytics is all about, right? Now, what makes it really important for business? Let's understand we've gone through this huge churn in the last 1 or 2 years in terms of a thought process and the way we approached our work, right? Which means there has been a lot of talent drain that has happened. The constraints that we are operating with today in organizations are something that we never imagined a couple of years ago. So today, you've got a lot of resignations happening in the organization. There is a lot of drain that is happening. Diversity inclusion is something that's becoming imperative in the organization. So how do you look at talent in this scenario, right? Which makes it really important for you to assess talent, look at certain analytics, or look at certain data in a point of view which could give you some competitive advantage, right? So that's what I'm talking about here. Let's just simplify what we are trying to talk. What if you get to understand that your people are unhappy, not aligned to the organization, and are not productive? Right? These are some common problems. I'm not talking any science. But we understand when a person resigns and goes out of the organization, you've spent a significant time and resource and energy in building that person, but the person leaves because maybe he or she was unhappy, misaligned, unproductive. Now, how do you get information about that? Today, most of the organizations, the way they approach it is post-mortem, which means once this event has happened, let's assess why this happened, right? That's one part of assessing data. But still, you will need to collect very, very, very good amount of data to be coming to a conclusion why a person left, for example, or why a person is, or a team is unproductive, or why an organization's talent is misaligned, which means I don't know what the organization is trying to achieve, so how do I come to terms with that? As simple as that, right? So that's why it makes it very important for any business to be looking at analytics in a very different way. And what I was also talking about is the volumes of data that we've collected over the past is something that's humongous, right? We will agree with that, right? Most of you, and I can make that statement confidently because I've been operating in this industry for the last 20 years, know that we collect a lot of data. There is a lot of data, right? Whether it is transactional data or any kind of data. But how to use this data is something that we struggle with. That's where analytics comes into play, right? So that makes it more important. The kind of data that you're sitting today on is something that's very important. How many of you get mail from Google of the distance that you've traveled in a year and the countries that you've covered? How many of you? I get it. I get it. Which tells, you have been to 12 countries, so many kilometers, so much of walk done. What is this data, right? So a simple data like an employee tag, which is an RFID or say probably any sensor that you've given to your employee, can generate humongous amount of data. Imagine, right? So if you get to understand your salespeople moving in, in the field from one point to another, what is the kind of time that they've taken, what is the kind of productivity that they've done overall in a day, covering 6-7 locations, so on and so forth. So a simple employee tag can generate a lot of data, right? So Google does that, and I'm sure you would have looked at some videos where, Google or the likes were being questioned by the American authorities. What do you do with data? You know that? You saw that video? Yeah, so it's crazy amount of data that we are sitting on. It makes it more important for us to be utilizing it effectively. The kind of life cycle tracking that we are doing today of an employee within the organization is happening beautifully, right? So you've got systems, you've got processes in place where you can actually track the movement of employees, say whether it's promotions, transfers, XYZ, or movements that happen, right? Which is very effectively captured today. But how we put to use, that data to use is something that's important. And also the sources that are collecting data are multiple. As I said, employee tag is one, your systems are one. We have moved into an economy where conversational HR is becoming, very important, wherein I don't log into the system, but I just talk to the WhatsApp and get all the information that I need about HR. We're doing that, right? So we are moving to a conversational concept in HR, which means that these conversations also have hidden sentiments of what you're writing to a bot, for example. You're using bots in any of your system? Or probably any website, there is a bot that talks to you. How do you know what kind of analysis of data is happening when a bot is talking to you? Right? So there is a lot of NLP that goes into today's engines to be churning the real sentiment that you actually have today. And the kind of sentiment analysis that these people can do for using bots is something that's crazy. So we've got NLP as a science, which works and looks at data in a very different way. Right? So the kind of data sources that we have today is absolutely crazy. So it becomes important for business and HR alike to be building a model which can essentially do a lot of value add to the overall organization and HR as a department, going forward. So that's what makes it, more the most important, function today in the organizations. So if we have to now look at where do we start from? So my first question was, very important. How many of you are currently really doing data analytics, right? Because at times that start point is not clear. You could be doing, I'm not denying that. But as I said, in an overall global survey, 8% of the respondents that McKinsey spoke to very clearly said that we are the only one doing something significant. Other respondents said, we are nowhere there, right? So what is the start point? So if you're a small organization, you can just walk up to your CEOs or key business managers asking one simple question. What are the top 3 biggest issues you think we have in company related to people? As simple as that. It will be your start journey to talent analytics or people analytics. Because the way CEO or the leader of the organization looks at the overall scenario is very different. A people lens, probably a business lens, a market lens, so on and so forth. So this is what you can ask, to your CEO, and that becomes your start point. So if I was to ask you this question and we do this activity in the next 1 minute, if you're okay with it, you're okay to be scribbling something on your notepads? It's okay? You can do that? Okay. So if I give you this, this designation today, all of you are CEOs, right? All of you are CEOs, and your HR is walking up to you saying, Mr. CEO, what are the top 3 challenges that you want me to solve? What would those 3 challenges be? Can you just scribble on your notepads? Simple. If you can, please. It's important because we need to think about it. I can give you enormous amount of data on how people do, people analytics, but it's important for us to be connecting to what forms people analytics. And also in the second half of the day, what David was talking about is you're going to do a lot of thought churning amongst yourself, right? So it will become important for you to be getting into that flow. So what do you think, or say an HR approaches you and asks you a question, Mr. CEO, or Ms. CEO, what is it, what do you want us to solve? The top 3 challenges in the organization. Anyone who has written top 3 challenges? Anyone who wants to talk? Anyone? Raise of hands. I think you're absolutely scared of me. It's okay, right? I'm a good guy. Anyone who has written something? It's important for the group to know. Anyone? Oh, thank you. Volunteer. You got a chocolate from me at the end of the session.
One is very important is leadership, about the leadership. How to the leader to coach, to coaching, to transfer the knowledge for subordinate and etc. Culture change, yeah, because we much agile, right, in our condition, digital insurance, and then we must adopt to the current situation. Yeah.
Okay. Good. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this. These points. Anyone who wants to talk more? Yeah.
I think first dilemmas that usually we have is about the talent turnover, okay. And then the second one is productivity, okay. And then drives to engagement.
Engagement. Okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay. So productivity, engagement are the 2 things, of course, top that comes to your mind. Of course, you spoke about talent, leadership, actually coaching people down below. How do you transfer the knowledge, in the organization? Good points. Anyone? Yes, you wanted to say something? Yeah.
I think how we create the competitive mindset. Okay. Competitive mindset to compete to the market, and then to win the customer. How to create a product, how to build the learning and development curve.
Sure. Okay. Right. Competitive advantage, building the, so actually winning the customer. What do you do to do that? So very good points. Now, if you were to go into the genesis of these points that you've just shared, right, which is engagement, culture change. Yeah, okay. Mukul, you want to say something? Okay.
My problem I like to define is how we make people collaborative to work together as a team.
So collaboration, knowledge transfer, leadership building, engagement, productivity, competitive advantage, how to win more customers. You see, these are the problems which are real problems that businesses face today. Now, if one has to create an analytical strategy, of course, Mukul's point is how do people collaborate well in the organization? There are answers in analytics as well to all these questions, right? But the point is how aligned you are and your team is to be solving these problems using what data you have and what would you want to crunch going forward. That is what real people talent analytics is, right? So for example, if you have to look at competitive advantage, I ask you a question that whether do you have any source of data which will give you what other organizations are doing as best practices? How do we capture that? We really don't know. On engagement, are we looking at the entire life cycle of the employees and saying probably at this stage of the life cycle, the employee is getting disengaged? Do we have that data? The answer could be yes or no. Do I know what the leadership competencies are and are they being translated into the real action items from learning point of view, which is leadership competencies? Am I capturing that? On collaboration, do I have a very robust performance management process which could actually mark a KRA saying, this is the way you collaborate with your goals being shared with other departments? Am I capturing that data or not? So if I'm not capturing, the first thing that we all need to hit is the data source. How do you build that data source? I think that becomes a real important thing for us to be looking at. And there are various ways and mechanisms to do it. Either you could go into a brainstorming session. Of course, you do it with your leadership team as well, internally within HR as well. But what we need to solve together is the genesis of this problem. While I know there is this problem, I am not finding solution because if there were solutions, you would have not highlighted these points, right? So what are the data points that relate to all that you've just shared, productivity for that matter? Am I doing timesheets in organizations, in my organization and teams? Or am I looking at some very hybrid process that actually makes people productive, which goes hand in hand with engagement? So how do I do that? How do I make my job role more interesting and more innovating so that employees are not disengaged? And do I capture that data? And do I also benchmark that data? Now that's important, right? So an inward focus is looking at having the right set of data and the problems that we're facing because of that. And how do we actually have an integrated team is what I was talking about. Do we talk a lot to IT or finance or cross department to see what are certain data points that I could look at and then build an equation together? That's important, right? I could give you formulas to any KPIs that you're looking at, which is building any sort of analytics. But it's important for us to actually together go through the journey of starting people analytics, right? So that's the major point here. So every problem that you have, the solution would be in data, maybe 60, 70, 80%. But the point is we need to start capturing that. And that's where your people analytical or people analytics or talent analytics strategy comes into play, right? And your choice of technology, your choice of vendor, everything comes into play. If I was to capture A, B, C, D in this entire Excel sheet in a very automated way, what are the sources that I look at? Which is my preferred vendor? What are the best practices there in the market? That becomes your start point. And then becomes, the whole value chain of your, so as to say, strategy, which you will want to implement to actually, at the end of the day, graduate to a level which is called a very matured model of doing people analytics, right? So that's the start point to people analytics, which is both outward as well as inward, right? That's the main point here. So ultimately, if you were to, cross this journey, it is very important. I think this is an excerpt picked up from a study done by McKinsey. So it's a McKinsey model. I could do a sharing of this PPT at the end of the session as well. But what it says is that there is a staircase to go to a level of maturity in people analytics. It is not something that happens overnight. It's transformation, right? You agree with that? You can't say that, I wake up today and I'll be a champion in people analytics as an organization. It doesn't happen that way, right? So you have to build it slowly and steadily. The first stage that I will translate for you, I think, because this is courtesy, the McKinsey study that I had, so I had to pick it up from there. The first stage that generally starts with is me as an organization standing on a poor platform, which means I've got a poor quality of data in my system as source, right? Which means there is nothing to be boasting about. I'm doing everything on Excel. Some of you will silently relate to it. Some of the work that we do still having systems in the organization is actually mostly on Excel sheet, right? Or say any other tool that we use. So what is happening to me as an organization if I don't move to the next level? So the first transformation stage is from stage 1 to stage 2, which means I move from a poor data platform to a good data platform, which means that I will be, as an organization, heavily investing time and resources into building capability in transactional processes, which means any operative life cycle process of an employee goes on to tech platform. You're enabling transactions, which means you're building a solid foundation where every data point is being captured through technology. Nothing is outside technology. So what happens is, in this stage, organizations start investing in scouting for good technology partners. You could have done that already, which means your HRMS systems, it could be ancillary systems, ERPs that are working in the organization. So from a CEO perspective, it becomes important. It is not only HR, but it's also other functions that I need to enable. How do I integrate that? You would have heard of this concept called balance scorecard, isn't it? Right? Most of you would have, right? All of us are HR practitioners. Where did it actually arise from? It is actually a business viewpoint to see what is my score in terms of overall operations and the business problem that I'm trying to solve. And it doesn't happen only through HR. There are all functions that actually build a balance scorecard, right? So I move from poor data to a good data stage where I do a very high data quality build, and I also look at significant investment in resources, time and technology, very importantly, to make me stabilize in this stage. And the next stage then becomes a little bit easy, right? Because you have now created a database or a foundation which can now be leveraged. How do you leverage that? You bring in certain scientific tools to be assessing that data, building certain top KPIs. For example, what was just spoken, productivity, engagement, some bit on competency, leadership competencies. How do I see that? Can my performance management system translate these competencies into actionables, and I am able to track and assess these competencies, for example, right? So there will be various things that you'll be starting to do in technology, and you will be building and experimenting with a lot of technologies to see what is the right mix that the organization needs to have. You will come onto a stage where you will have a standardized way of looking at data in terms of visualization and dashboards, which could be simple dashboards, descriptive sort of reports, going at the first level, which is hindsight approach, which means what has happened, how do I analyze it, right? So basic dashboarding is what you start with. That's, the key moment where you actually invest heavily in technology and start building those KPIs and visualizations. Then comes a very advanced stage. We'll not talk about movement from stage 3 to 4 and 4 to 5 because these are some things which are actually dream for organizations today. Very heavily capitalized business today are able to move to stage 4 and 5, which means there is significant investment of time, resources, money that goes into building this stage. But yes, it does exist. It is not a dream, which means that I now start getting into a stage where I do some bit of, so as to say, SPSS, Python, some sort of algos that I start to write, depending upon what I want to solve as a problem in business. So it is not copycat. It is not something that I'll copy from other organization. Of course you do benchmark, but your business problem is your business problem. Your function HR problem is your function HR problem, right? I could be more heavy on looking at productivity, not engagement. I could be very heavy in looking at how leadership development is happening, not worried about engagement, for example. So you build your KPIs in this stage, which is an advanced analytics stage, which is movement from 3 to 4. You introduce data science, you look at generating certain actionable insights. Now, this is important. That's a maturity stage, which means if I know something has happened, what is it that I can do to prevent it in what are those actions that I can do? As a function, as a leader, as someone who owns this data, can my data give me that insight? Is something that's the next stage that you move into. And then finally, you move into a stage which is called stage 5 of maturity of analytics, which means that you start predicting, right? So you would have heard of predictive analytics as well, right? Which means that I can predict, say, for example, turnover ratio in my organization, attrition. I could predict a probability of a candidate joining me. I could predict someone's success in a job role that you assign to him or her. All these predictives come with a huge amount of data that you start churning in stage 1, 2, 3, and 4 together. And then you come and you reach to that stage. So it doesn't happen overnight, right? You can't buy data of your organization from outside, right? That's a simple concept. You have to generate your own data and then get into this maturity model of moving from stage 3 to 4 to 5, right? So that's the stairway to impact. But what is most important is for us to realize which stage I am in. That's the most important point, right? I could be in stage 1. There is no problem in stage 1. Every organization goes through that. I could be on stage 2, which is fine. You're starting to build what you really envision. But it is important to connect to the stage that I am in. I'll tell you a classic problem that organizations and functions go through, and some of you will relate to it. I will go and talk to a technology partner or an enabler in the market and say, I need this dashboard, I need that dashboard, this is the way I need to look at data. My boss is asking for this kind of data. Can your system give me that? For example, right? And the first question that the enabler will ask you is, what kind of data are you sitting on? Because what goes in comes out. So it is a typical, so as to say, factory setup, which means I give some input, I process that input, the output depends upon the way you have processed it, and also the input that goes into it. Simple. Right? So the classic problem that we face is we actually want to move to a stage 4 or 5 by skipping stage 2 and 3, which becomes a classical trap. And there comes the entire essential factor of technology failure, right? So some of you would also have, created some thought process and paradigms on technology doesn't work. This doesn't work, that doesn't work. Everything is put to work with the kind of efforts that you put in to build these stages. This is very important. Thanks to McKinsey for giving this model for people analytics and analytics in general. So as we can actually connect to where we are right now. That's my threshold stage. So my threshold could be at 2, 3 at this point in time. The vision could be to move to 4 and 5. So that's what this stairway of impact means in the overall value chain that we're looking at. Of course, this is a published model, by Gartner, which says that you actually move from hindsight to insight to foresight. That is the typical journey of people analytics or analytics generally, right? Not people analytics. So I actually do a postmortem. I actually then get into the next stage, which is purely insights, which is actionable insights is what I start generating. And then I start predicting. These are typically the stages that you will go through when you're looking at analytics and the equations related to analytics in your organization. This is a published model. This is, courtesy Gartner, that I'm sharing this with you. But this is a typical journey that, one goes through. Now, some of the key people development analytics, we'll spend some time on this slide. All of us as HR practitioners know the kind of processes that we manage in our organizations, right? You could pick up any employee life cycle event, starting from your manpower plan to recruitment, to onboarding, to life cycle management, which could be employee mobility. You could be looking at compensation management. You could be doing a lot of work on exit management. So there are processes that you enable, right? Whether it is manual or it is through technology, but it becomes important, for each one of you to think that if you don't have the right technology, at the end of the day, analytics actually becomes a little difficult to achieve, right? So what it is actually is that you can't have a good analytical strategy built in isolation. So you also have to have a very close talk happening with other systems in the enterprise, whether it could be CRM, whether it's financial and control systems that you've got, or a sales system that you've got. So typically, for example, organizations would want to look at one KPI, which is, say, workforce planning, is looking at if I incur an X amount of cost on a resource, what is the kind of output that I can get from that resource, basis the data that I have in past, right? So that's kind of a little bit of maturity, in which if the person is a sales staff, I would try and actually get connected to the sales system through technology, and also look at the overall sales and how it breaks down to every individual or department for that matter, right? So it is not in isolation. Of course, in isolation, HR can build some good KPIs, but typically if you have to look at a concept in HR, which is, of course, a very distant concept, some of you could also be practicing it, is a 9-box grid. A wise man actually, of course, spoke to me, said, no organization in this world has been able to plot a perfect 9-box grid, which is potential versus performance, right? Most of you would be dealing with this. Most of you would be working on this, right? But there is no way in which I could look at potential versus performance and then looking and plotting my, because potential assessment is a very wide area. You could actually do it through competencies, you could actually do it through any other tool that you've got. But ultimately, what I believe is, with potential and performance, you also need to have engagement scores. Someone spoke about engagement, right? So if I'm able to make it 3-dimensional, can I actually build a quality KPI or a people analytic which can give me deep insight into my organization? So it is not 2-dimensional, it is 3-dimensional. So there is a third axis that is plotted, which makes it 3-dimensional, taking your engagement, potential, and performance score to really plot you at the end of the day where you fall. Are you a high performer, high potential, medium engagement? Or are you a high potential, medium performer, high engagement? Right? So that's the kind of churn that probably we will need to think through. Basis what you want to solve as an organization, which will make sure that your people analytical or people analytics strategy is well in place and in sync with what you're trying to achieve and the business is trying to achieve. So the point here is that there are various categories of people analytics. So you could look at workforce planning, talent sourcing, acquisition, so many KPIs that we work on. The funnel, you've heard of recruitment funnel, which means how many people applied, how many got shortlisted, how many got interviewed, finally how many got selected. So you've got this KPI that you build. But do I have the technology backup or the process backup, which would give me some key points to be churning these kind of ratios? So your overall joining ratio, the overall TAT for actually doing your position filling, and what is the cost associated to filling a position? Not just the cost that you give as a compensation package to employee, but also the time and effort that gets invested by, say, 5 people to get a resource on board. Your learning cost, right? The overall cost that you actually take and take a hit in the organization to create that infrastructure for a person to be sitting on a chair that you offer, right? So there are various cost mechanisms that one needs to capture. So similarly, you've got onboarding, engagement, employee performance. I spoke about performance versus engagement. So you could look at some of these people analytics to maybe come to an insight as to what exactly would you want to plot, right? So people analytics is a very wide area of discussion. Ultimately, we could spend hours and hours on how we need to do it. There are tools, technologies, infrastructure, processes, benchmarks, all available for you to be doing good people analytics. But ultimately, the finger points back to you. What do you want to do, and what do you want to achieve? I think that's the most important part that one needs to look at. So, any questions that you have so far? Any questions? Of course, Slido is something that's working. But anything that you have so far in your mind that you would really want to ask? Yes.
Okay. You're talking about the people analytic. So in my understanding is, so we are in the AI era. So my question is there any measurement tools that from the AI era or AI system, we could measure people behavior? We could, from that point, the employee behavior could increase or could boost the performance, could do something better. year by year by the AI system, or maybe your system has it. I don't know, but at least there's a challenge. There's a challenge situations where I think most company, when they invest to the HRIS system, they just want to know what is the return effect after they invest to the HRIS system, whether there is a robust changing on the employee behavior or employee performance according to that tools. Thank you.
Thank you. Good question, I believe. So again, my counter question to that would be, you of course want to achieve at the end of the day how engaged the employee is, how AI ML could be actually practically applied to what I'm doing day in, day out. So there are various use cases that you could look at. Also depends upon the maturity model in terms of processes and technology that you have in your organization right now. So a typical example of an artificial intelligence on machine learning working in day-to-day environment, I spoke about bot in front of you. So if you've got an HR bot that is talking to you, for example, we give a voice bot and we give a talking bot as well, or you can write to bot as well. Anything that you write or the number of transactions that you're doing on a bot, the bot or AI, part of that will be able to capture your pattern, for example, right? And also prompt you next time that, hey, I observed last time, you have done these kinds. So it's called frequently used transactions, right? So the bot will pop up saying, would you want to apply for a leave, for example, right? And I can predict that probably the leave that you are applying is, say, for example, an annual leave or a PL or any kind of leave that is example. So that's one way of predicting pattern, which is very transactional. The other way to look at it is, if you look at any feedback or a system or a process that generates a lot of unstructured data, which means that I, as a manager or an employee, is writing some comments on, say, for example, a performance management form. Can my system analyze what exactly is the sentiment behind this statement? So you have got a practical application of AI working and NLP working there, right, which is natural language programming, looking at whether this statement is a positive statement, a negative statement, or a neutral statement. So that's where you can start plotting the behavior of people as well. So there are many use cases. But at the end of it, when you talk about coming to concluding where the organization's overall pattern of behavior and the kind of patterns that get registered in the system, there are advanced programs which could help you plot that. But the idea is, what is it that you are seeking at the end of the day? Ultimately, you also will talk about what is the return that has happened on investment, whether in soft form or hard form or in productivity that you're trying to do. But it's important, how do you want to use the data? That's what I said. What is your start point? What are those challenges that you are trying to solve will actually give you answers to how you would want to look at data. But yes, AI/ML has gone to a level where, for example, a simple tool where you do a facial recognition, right? Most of you have heard of facial recognition and attendance related to that. So there are various points in faces that this recognition system can look into, which marks your face and then gives you a attendance stamp that yes, I see you present. But parallelly, what it could also do is also look at the mood that you have on your face and could plot that in terms of data. People are doing that. So typically in a restaurant, which is, so as to say, for example, KFC or McDonald's or any other restaurant that you actually talk about, you have to actually present as a person, smile to every customer who is coming, right? So if you are doing a facial recognition, right, facial recognition, and the mood gets plotted, you can actually generate insight for the store manager saying, hey, looks like these two people are not in good mood. Would you want to talk to them? It's happening, right? So depends upon what business you are into, what is the scenario that you want to crack, what is it that you're looking at the end of it. So you can do a 100 sort of use cases here and could build this equation for for your business and for your function as well. I hope I've answered your question, right? Anyone else who wants to talk? Sorry, these 5 minutes are including the Q&A or it is just the talk? Is it Q&A as well? Okay, overall. Okay, right. Anyone else who wants to talk? Anyone who wants, before we get into the Slido, can we have Slido? Can we have questions? from you. I'm not here to give you a breakthrough formula of being champion in people analytics. As I said, it's a journey. It's a transformation journey that one needs to go through. And I'm being as realistic as possible, and as straightforward as possible to you, that it's about you assessing what stage you are in, whether it's technology, process maturity, or the way you do business, in the market. So that is what is important. And of course, I was also talking to someone outside on our exhibition booth. Wellness is something that has become very important, right? What about wellness? Now, in fact, from wellness, we've moved to an entire era of experience. Now, that's what we're trying to map in technology or otherwise as well. So there has been an era where we spoke about engagement. From engagement, we moved to wellness. And after pandemic or the era that we spoke about, it's all about experience now. Someone was talking about, of course, my session which happened earlier was about how the culture change has happened in terms of getting into a hybrid mode of working, doing remote work, back to office or work from home becoming actually the language that we're talking, how it is impacting the overall experience that you are able to generate as a function. It's very challenging for HR to be doing some bit of analytics on moodometer for people who are working from home. Very challenging. How do you collect that? But that could be one KPI from an analytical point of view that you could look at. For one of the largest banks in Asia, the work that we did was doing hourly moodometer plotting to an employee strength of 125,000 employees, right? So we did that. The requirement was only to check, where the mood of the organization is or employees is, right? So from wellness to experience is the journey that actually comes right now when it comes to the overall people analytic plotting that you do for organization, right? Does HONO also provide benchmark data for similar industries for management's consideration in making decision? Yes, we do that. The session is, of course, not about HONO, but yes, we do that. We'll invite you to come over to our exhibition booth and we can discuss about this further. Yes, we do benchmarks because we do a lot of work on engagement and sentiment analysis. So, of course, it is all anonymous. You could not be citing what industry. So, of course, the industry cut and the other demographic cuts are available, but not the sensitive cuts that you could look at in terms of data. So, we do that work, okay? How do we form a mindset related to the importance of data analysis in organizations with limited literacy and technology? Wonderful question, right? Mindset is something, first of all, that can be enforced upon you. The mindset of a CEO gets pushed onto you and you have to create a mindset. That's by force. Secondly, as custodian of your departments, people leading, the functions, as I said, it becomes imperative for you to connect to the real problems that you are facing. In case you're facing some real challenges in the organization that you would want to build, that you will want to actually get rid of, the mindset comes automatically. Because ultimately, you are answerable to solving those challenges, right? So, mindset, there is no formula to be creating a mindset until unless you decide that, yes, I am someone who is going to take the lead and start this transformation, which is a journey. There is no formula to mindset. But yes, the only cue to mindset building is the problems that you get attached to and the solutions that you would want for that. As simple as that. So that's the question from Diane. What do you think are the most necessary skills someone in this role should have? Tech is meaningless if the person using it is not equipped with competences. Wonderful, yes. So when you say the most necessary skills someone in this role, so this role, I'm assuming you're referring to the analytical head role or what kind of role? Cristano, can I have this clarification? Yes.
What I'm trying to say is we're going to build a specific HR department doing people analytics. Those people, those employees that will be there, what kind of competencies that they should have so that they can produce, like what you said earlier, garbage in, garbage out, right? So how do they digest the data for top management so that it becomes a useful decision-making point?
Thank you. Good question. So I was also talking about the stages of maturity, right? I spoke about movement from stage 2 to stage 3. One important point in stage to stage 3 movement is building the right talent to be actually upholding the equation of people analytics in organization, right? So talent is important, the mindset is important. So one has to consciously, when I said investment in resources and time and energy, resources mean that you need to have those special skill set in the organization to be driving this, because imparting a skill, of course, becomes difficult, but if you have the capacity to bring that skill on board, which is best in market, is something that really helps the organization. And once it is infused in the organization, the language starts to happen. You could actually train people, and you could build that entire equation amongst the team that this is the mandate that I'm trying to drive. So it is about infusing the right skill, which is rightly said. In fact, the next slide that I was going to talk about, here, will answer your question as well, because it's a question in itself. Can I move this, please? So the last part that I was actually wanting to bring onto is what ingredients does the organization possess today, and which does it need to build? Talent is one part of that, right? Which means when you're looking at data and data management capability, analytical capability, and operating model. So the operating model needs to have the right talent set for you to be building a sustainable people analytics practice in the organization. You can't be actually driving or imparting skill of analytics to anyone in the organization. Of course, you can train to a certain extent, but you will have certain infusion that you will need to bring. The last part of my presentation is how do you actually talk about building a sustainable people? I hope I've answered your question, right? How do you actually help the organization to build a sustainable practice of people analytics? So there are key questions that you would want to ask yourself. I will leave you with these questions. Some of these questions I've already asked you. Where is the organization on the people analytics stairway? The same stairway that I spoke about, right? That's how you connect, number one. And where do I aspire to be on that stairway in the coming 1 or 2 years, or the journey that I've plotted for myself? How does the organizational context influence the mandate of people analytics team? Which means that am I looking more inwards to build a people analytics equation, or it's more outwards? I need to do a lot of work in the market as well and build certain KPIs and analytics which will really make sense for business growth and business value enhancement, right? So that's the second question. Third, of course, is what ingredients does the organization possess today? One is, of course, as I said, data management capabilities, right technology, right framework of capturing data, and can I build on that and create something that is really magical? Second is analytical capability, analytics capability within the organization, right? Which means that the team, the equation that we spoke about in operating model as well, these are interchangeable. But what is the capability in terms of you looking at breaking the benchmarks in the way analytics are being done, right? So what's my thought process mindset on that? How should the organization determine its priorities in building people analytics capability? Again, inward to outward, right? How do I build it up? Whether I do an investment today in the organization to building my talent, or I take it, to the equation to outside world and then, hire talent. And of course, am I also supporting certain challenges or through this people analytics equation that I'm trying to create, which is more towards my refinement within the organization, or I'm also wearing a lens which captures the market sense as well? And if the organization had to get one thing right over the next 12 months, this is very important. What would it be? What would get in the way of getting there? Most important part, which is, we talk about a 4-year, 5-year journey. It's important to plot the next 12 months. What do I want to achieve? What is it that I want to see? And what is coming in the way to me to be plotting that in my system or process or my organization or department otherwise? These are certain questions, if you ask yourself, and I will leave you with these questions, is something that will actually give you a good start point to be creating a wonderful and a meaningful people analytics or a talent analytical strategy in your organization, right? We can go on to Slido. Any questions that someone has on this? These are questions that I'm putting back to you, right? Which is doing some bit of insightful work for me to be very clear on how do I need to build on this in my organization. Any questions that someone has on this slide? Any questions? Can we go back to Slido? Do we have more questions? People have covered unspoken things, feelings. Mostly we can capture that during conversation, interaction. how it can be converted into data and being analyzed. As I said, your conversations, the positive, negative sentiments, can very well be captured using technology. Of course, the human interface remains there, but yes, you've got tools, methods, technologies to be doing a lot of deep work, a lot of machine learning that happens where machine learns on its own the kind of statements that are coming from a specific individual. Of course, it is anonymous, but you could start building the age cuts. You could start building the department cuts. You could do all these demographic cuts once these NLP equations come into play and your machine starts to give you certain insights. Yes, it is possible. How the people analytics can help organization make the right decision and what kind of outcome is most important to help organization sustain and perform. Two parts to this question. How can people analytics help organizations make the right decision? Again, what is the business that I'm trying to drive? What is this that I have envisioned as business, right? And what is it that I'm trying to monitor through data, and whether I'm capturing the data or not is what will decide whether I make right decisions or not. If I am looking at the overall productivity enhancement or say productivity loss management in the organization, do I have the right tool and the data to capture where the productivity loss is happening? That will give you answer to your first part. That can people analytic help? Yes, it can help. If you are able to plot and predict absenteeism in a manufacturing location, you are also able to curve productivity loss because my system has the capability to give you a skill-based replacement of person who is being absent. Simple. I'm just giving you one example to this. So you will be able to take the right decision at right time, and it could be augmented through technology, machine, without any human intervention, or you could have the data and you could make those actions and can generate some actionable insights from the system, right? And what kind of outcome is most important to help organization sustain and perform? Again, data at a level which of course could be basic, but enforces what I am trying to drive as an organization is something that is important. Too much of data, too much of dimensions that you open up will only complicate the equation. It's about bringing data to a very simple price and foundation for you to sustain and build this performance KPIs. That is what I said. What do you want to change in the next 12 months in your organization? And what is standing in the way of that is something that's important. How do we ensure data protection while using data analytics tools or platform? This is cakewalk. All the tools that you actually work on today, of course, I'm not talking about manual because manually you could have data leaks, but all the tools that you have today in technology, most of them will have all the compliances that you can think of, whether it is IT security, system, organization compliances that you actually have. You could also be looking at GDPR compliances, which means that your data is encrypted, it can't be taken out in the format which is human readable format. So you have all those checks and balances. Most of the system today have moved to a cloud platform. You understand what cloud platform is, right? Traditionally, of course, it was on-prem where you did your own implementations, but cloud systems today actually are being offered with a very high level of security. And with these compliances, you can be assured that there is no data leak. Yes, I can't help when someone actually is doing it manually on an Excel sheet and is being circulated. Will the system be able to feed the leader to prepare the strategy for short and long term? Definitely yes. Definitely yes. My time's up, but I'll answer this question. It is definitely yes, because there are certain forecasting models available in which you could actually be plotting how the business outcome be if these three scenarios actually hit the business. So there are forecasting models that you can actually build upon. Again, coming back to the same question and forcing that onto you. What do you want to see and what do you want to build is something that's important. There are tools, technology and thought processes, benchmarks available for you to be looking at preparing yourself for short term and long term. Typically from a manpower planning perspective, you can do a lot. You could do a lot of, as HR, the answer is you could do a lot of forecasting on if your business is growing X times, what is the kind of number that you need to put on your organization structure given the history of the organization operating at a certain headcount level, for example, right? So these are certain KPIs that you could build to help you build a sustainable business practice on people analytics and analytics generally. Thank you so much for your time, patiently listening to me. Terima kasih.
Thank you for the beautiful sharing.